The hospital room was quiet, except for the soft hum of machines and the faint rhythm of rain tapping against the window. Clara lay on the bed, her body weak, but her heart full. After long, painful hours, she had finally given birth to her first child, a tiny, fragile being wrapped carefully in a white blanket beside her. The nurses had congratulated her before leaving her to rest, and her husband had stepped out to make a quick phone call to the family, promising to return in a few minutes. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic, mixed with the warmth of something new, the scent of life itself. Clara's eyelids fluttered as exhaustion took hold, but even in her half-sleep, her mind lingered on the baby. She could still hear the soft coos, the gentle breathing, and every sound pulled her heart deeper into a feeling she had never known before. Just as she began to drift into sleep, the door creaked open. A quiet figure entered, a nurse wearing light blue scrubs and a calm, focused expression. The woman moved with practiced grace, her steps soundless on the tiled floor. In the dim glow of the bedside lamp, Clara saw her silhouette moving closer to the crib. The nurse leaned down slightly, her hands gentle and careful as she adjusted the blanket around the baby. Clara's eyes blinked open slowly, still clouded with fatigue. Her mind, hazy and tired, struggled to understand what she was seeing. Everything felt distant. The sound of the rain, the soft beeping of the monitor, the faint rustle of the nurse's gloves. For a moment, Clara simply watched, comforted by the quiet presence in the room. The nurse's movements were slow and deliberate, her gaze full of tenderness as she checked the baby's breathing and temperature. There was something almost maternal in the way she handled the newborn, as if this was more than just a routine task. The sight should have been comforting, but an unexpected unease began to creep into Clara's chest. The nurse's face was calm, but unfamiliar. She hadn't seen this woman in the delivery room earlier. Clara's heart gave a small, nervous flutter. Maybe she was just another shift nurse, she thought. Still, the dim light made the scene look strange, the soft glow on the nurse's dark skin, the quiet hum of the machines, the slow rhythm of the nurse's breathing. Clara couldn't tell if she was dreaming or awake. The nurse turned slightly, glancing at the baby with a small, knowing smile, before checking a note on the chart. The child stirred softly, but didn't cry. The moment stretched longer than it should have. Clara's fingers twitched on the blanket. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came out. A mix of fear, confusion, and exhaustion swirled in her mind. She didn't know it yet, but that single moment, the quiet between a mother, her newborn, and a nurse, would become the beginning of something far greater than misunderstanding. It was the first breath of a story that would test hearts, reveal truths, and teach what compassion really meant. The soft rhythm of the rain outside continued as Clara slowly woke from her half-sleep, her mind still heavy with fatigue and the haze of painkillers. For a few seconds, everything seemed peaceful. The quiet hum of machines, the dim yellow light above her bed, and the faint, comforting sound of her baby breathing. But then her eyes blinked open fully, and what she saw made her heart stop. A nurse stood beside the crib, holding her baby gently in her arms. The woman's expression was calm and kind, her movements slow and careful, as if she were handling something precious. Yet Clara's exhausted mind didn't see the tenderness. She only saw a stranger holding her child. Her pulse quickened, confusion mixing with fear. The woman's skin was darker than most of the staff she had seen earlier, and in her clouded state, Clara's thoughts twisted unfairly. Her heart pounded louder than reason could speak. She pushed herself up slightly, her voice breaking the silence like glass shattering. "What are you doing with my baby?" The words came out sharper than she meant, filled with panic instead of thought. The nurse froze, startled not by the volume, but by the pain in the voice that spoke. The baby stirred in her arms, sensing the sudden tension in the air. The nurse immediately stepped back, her eyes wide but gentle, and carefully placed the baby back into the crib. "It's okay," she said softly, her voice steady and soothing. "I was just checking the blanket." But Clara's fear had already taken root. Her breathing was quick, her mind racing with worry. In that moment, logic had no place, only instinct. She reached out for her baby, pulling the crib closer, clutching the blanket as if to shield her child from something unseen. The room fell still. The hum of the machines returned, louder in the silence that followed. Another nurse rushed in, sensing the raised voice, and looked between the two women, unsure of what had just happened. The dark-eyed nurse, still calm, took a slow step back and whispered, "I meant no harm. I was making sure the baby was warm." Her tone held no anger, only quiet grace. But behind her steady face, there was a flicker of hurt, a familiar kind of pain that comes when someone's kindness is met with fear. The other nurse tried to calm Clara, assuring her that everything was fine, that the woman she had shouted at was one of the senior nurses in the ward. But Clara couldn't shake the unease she felt, even though part of her already regretted the way she had spoken. The moment passed, but the air in the room remained heavy. The nurse gave a small nod, collected herself, and walked out silently, her footsteps fading down the hallway. Clara sat frozen, the baby sleeping soundly beside her, unaware of the storm that had just passed between two hearts. And though she didn't realize it yet, the echo of that one fearful outburst would return to her, not as guilt alone, but as the beginning of a lesson that would change her forever. The room filled with uneasy silence as Clara's cry still echoed faintly against the white hospital walls. The nurse, Ms. Lonnie, immediately placed the baby back in the cradle, her movements careful and composed despite the sting in her chest. She took a small step back, her calm face hiding the deep hurt that had just pierced her heart. Moments later, the door burst open and two other nurses hurried in, their eyes darting between the shaken mother and the quiet figure standing near the crib. Clara's breathing was fast and uneven, her heart pounding as she clutched the blanket closer to her chest. "She was holding my baby," Clara whispered, her voice trembling between fear and confusion. The head nurse, an older woman with silver hair tied neatly back, stepped forward and gently placed a hand on Clara's shoulder. "It's all right, Mrs. Clara," she said softly, her voice firm yet kind. "This is Ms. Lonnie, one of our most trusted nurses. She's been with this hospital for over a decade. Your baby was perfectly safe." The words were meant to comfort, but Clara's mind refused to settle. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment, yet her pride built a wall she could not lower. She didn't want to admit she had been wrong, not in front of so many eyes. So instead, she folded her arms tightly and looked away. Pretending that her fear was still justified, Ms. Lonnie stood quietly, saying nothing. Her calmness only made Clara feel more defensive, though she didn't understand why. "Next time," Clara muttered under her breath, "you should at least tell me before touching my baby." The head nurse gave her a long look, not harsh, but full of silent disappointment, then turned to Lonnie. "You can take a break," she said gently. Lonnie nodded without a word and walked out of the room, her footsteps slow but steady. The door closed softly behind her, but the guilt that lingered in the air felt loud. One of the younger nurses whispered to Clara she was only adjusting the blanket. The baby had kicked it off. Clara didn't reply. She just stared at the cradle, her thoughts a mess of confusion, shame, and pride. Part of her wanted to run after the nurse and apologize. But the other part, the stubborn part, told her she had done nothing wrong. Yet, deep inside, she knew she had misjudged someone who meant no harm. Hours passed, and the storm of emotion inside her didn't fade. Every time a nurse entered the room after that, Clara felt eyes on her, not unkind but distant. The once warm room now felt cold with unspoken tension. Outside, Ms. Lonnie sat quietly in the staff room, staring at her hands, the faint echo of Clara's fearful voice still replaying in her mind. She had seen such moments before, but this one hurt more, not because of anger, but because she had seen the love in Clara's eyes for her baby, and wished that same love could have seen beyond fear. Neither woman knew it yet, but this misunderstanding was only the beginning of a truth that would soon change them both in ways they could never imagine. The hours passed slowly, and the hospital room felt heavier than before. The air carried an awkward silence that neither Clara nor Ms. Lonnie dared to break. Every time the door opened and the nurse walked in, Clara's stomach tightened. She would look away, pretending to be busy with the baby or staring out the window. Ms. Lonnie, however, moved through the room with quiet grace, her face calm, her hands steady. She spoke only when needed, her voice soft and professional. There was no trace of anger, no coldness, only gentle care in every action. When she adjusted Clara's pillow, she did it carefully, so as not to disturb her rest. When the baby cried, she came quickly, checking the temperature, bringing a fresh blanket, and whispering words that seemed to calm even the little one's sobs. Clara watched her in secret, noticing how patient she was, how she smiled at the baby as if nothing had ever happened between them. The more Clara observed her, the more uneasy she became. A quiet guilt began to grow inside her, one she tried to ignore but couldn't escape. Every kind gesture from the nurse felt like a reminder of her own unfair reaction. When Ms. Lonnie brought her a warm cup of tea, Clara murmured a weak thank you, barely meeting her eyes. The nurse simply nodded and replied, "You're welcome, ma'am," before walking away with her usual calm. That simple kindness stung more than any harsh word could have. Clara's husband returned later that afternoon, cheerful and unaware of the morning's tension. He spoke excitedly about calling their families, but Clara barely responded. Her mind was elsewhere, trapped between pride and remorse. When he stepped out again, she found herself listening for footsteps in the hall, half expecting Ms. Lonnie to return. And when the nurse finally did, holding a tray with baby formula, Clara's chest tightened. She watched as the woman checked the baby's temperature and smiled softly, her movements gentle and full of care. It was hard to believe that the same woman she had accused was now treating her with such quiet respect. Clara wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Her throat felt dry, her voice locked behind her guilt. So she stayed silent, pretending to sleep while her mind raced with thoughts she didn't want to face. Hours turned into evening, and the shadows grew long across the room. The rhythmic beeping of hospital monitors filled the silence. Clara finally looked at her baby sleeping peacefully, wrapped warmly in the blanket that Ms. Lonnie had brought. For the first time, she truly noticed the small details, the nurse's steady hands, her gentle tone, her patience despite being wronged. Something inside Clara began to shift, though she didn't understand it yet. That night, as she lay awake listening to the soft hum of the machines, one thought echoed in her mind again and again, maybe. She had been wrong about the woman who showed more kindness than she ever expected. The soft hum of the hospital at night carried every whisper down the quiet hallway. Clara lay awake, unable to sleep, her thoughts still circling around the calm face of Ms. Lonnie. She could hear footsteps passing now and then, the wheels of trolleys squeaking faintly, and then the low voices of two nurses outside her half-open door. At first, Clara didn't pay attention, but when she heard Ms. Lonnie's name, her heart suddenly sharpened with curiosity. One nurse sighed, her voice filled with sympathy. "She never talks about it," the nurse said softly, "but everyone here knows. Years ago, during that gas explosion in the East Wing, she stayed behind to save the babies in the nursery." The other nurse gasped quietly. "But wasn't she pregnant back then?" The first one hesitated before replying, "Yes, she was. She lost her own child that night." The hallway fell into a painful silence after that, and Clara's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes widened, and her heart began to race. The words echoed in her head. She lost her own child while saving others. She couldn't move. The image of the calm, gentle nurse, who had cared for her baby all day, suddenly changed in her mind. The dark eyes that she had once feared were now filled with a pain she could only imagine. Clara turned her face toward her sleeping baby, tears blurring her vision. How could she have shouted at someone like that? How could she have doubted a woman who had already given everything to protect children? The shame was heavy, almost unbearable. She thought of how Ms. Lonnie had smiled gently even after being accused, how she had continued to care for her without hesitation. Every kind gesture now felt like a quiet forgiveness, one that Clara didn't deserve. The realization hit her harder than she expected. She remembered how Ms. Lonnie had tucked in her blanket, how she had calmed her crying baby with such care, how her hands had trembled slightly when she handed the baby back, not from fear, but from a memory she must have carried for years. Clara wiped her tears, but they kept coming, silent and warm against her tired cheeks. She wanted to get up, to find the nurse and say something, anything, but guilt pinned her to the bed. The weight of her earlier fear and prejudice now felt like poison in her chest. She had judged someone not for what they did, but for how they looked. The thought made her stomach twist. Outside, the whispers faded as the nurses moved on, leaving only the soft beeping of the monitor beside her bed. Clara stared at the ceiling, her heart aching. For the first time, she truly saw the difference between fear and understanding. One built walls, and the other broke them down. As she lay there, she knew she couldn't change what she had done, but she could change what she would do next, and in that quiet moment, she promised herself she would. The next morning, the sunlight spilled gently through the hospital blinds, painting thin golden lines across the room. Clara sat quietly, her baby sleeping peacefully in her arms. Every little breath from the child reminded her of the night before, of what she had overheard, of the truth that had changed everything inside her. The door opened softly, and the familiar sound of footsteps made her heart jump. Ms. Lonnie entered, dressed in her neat white uniform, holding a small tray of medicines and a soft, practiced smile. Her calmness filled the room like a warm wave, yet Clara's chest tightened with guilt. She wanted to say something, anything, an apology, a thank you, even a whisper of regret, but her throat refused to form words. Ms. Lonnie moved with her usual grace, checking the monitors, adjusting the baby's blanket, and recording notes on the chart. She worked with quiet precision, the same patience and care she had shown since the first day. Clara's eyes followed her every movement, filled with a silent ache. She wanted to explain that her fear had come from exhaustion, confusion, and ignorance, not hate, but the thought sounded hollow, even in her own mind. How could she justify hurting someone who had shown nothing but kindness? Ms. Lonnie finally looked at her, her gaze soft, but steady. "Your baby is strong," she said in a gentle voice. "You did well?" That was all. No anger, no bitterness, no cold distance, just warmth and understanding. The simple words hit Clara harder than any scolding could have. Her throat burned as she tried to respond, but her lips only trembled. Ms. Lonnie smiled faintly, as though she already knew what Clara wanted to say, but didn't need to hear it. That smile, kind and forgiving, felt like sunlight breaking through after a storm. It said, "I understand," without ever using the words. When the nurse turned to leave, Clara's eyes followed her to the door. She wanted to call out, to say "I'm sorry," but her voice caught in her chest. She realized then that sometimes forgiveness doesn't wait for words. It happens quietly, in gestures, in tone, in the gentle way one human chooses to rise above hurt. The room felt painfully still after Ms. Lonnie left. Clara stared at the spot where she had stood moments ago, her heart heavy but strangely calm. Her baby stirred in her arms, and Clara kissed the child's forehead softly. "You'll grow up kinder than I was," she whispered, her voice shaking. The baby's small hand reached out, brushing her chin, as if offering comfort. Clara smiled through her tears. She didn't know how to make things right, but she knew one thing for certain. She would never forget this moment, or the woman who had shown her what true grace looked like. Some lessons in humanity weren't taught through words. They were felt through silence, through compassion that asked for nothing in return. The days that followed were softer, quieter, filled with moments that stitched something broken back together. Each morning, Clara would wake to the gentle hum of the hospital corridor, the steady rhythm of footsteps, and the soft creak of the door as Ms. Lonnie entered the room. What once made Clara tense now brought a strange sense of comfort. The nurse's calm presence filled the space like a quiet melody, easing both mother and child into peace. Clara began to notice the small things, how carefully Ms. Lonnie held her baby, how she checked every detail twice, and how she smiled every time the infant stretched tiny arms toward her. The barrier between them, once cold and heavy, started to melt. It began with small talk, hesitant at first, just polite words about feeding schedules and recovery. But slowly, the conversations grew deeper. They spoke about sleepless nights, about the fear every new mother feels, and the fragile beauty of holding a life so new and delicate. Lonnie's voice carried a kind of warmth that wrapped around Clara's guilt and began to heal it. One afternoon, as sunlight spilled across the floor, Clara asked softly, "How do you stay so patient all the time?" Lonnie smiled, looking at the baby in the crib. "Because every child deserves kindness," she said quietly, "no matter where they come from or who their mother is." The words lingered in the air, gentle yet powerful, sinking deep into Clara's heart. She nodded, blinking back tears, unable to speak. That simple truth felt like a light turned on inside her, one that revealed how much her fear and judgment had blinded her before. The next time Ms. Lonnie came to feed the baby, Clara didn't just watch, she helped. Her hands trembling slightly at first, but steadier as the moments passed. They shared small laughs when the baby refused to drink, wrinkling its tiny nose in protest. For the first time, they were no longer nurse and patient. They were two women, two mothers, connected by something far deeper than words. Sometimes, silence filled the room, but it was no longer awkward. It was peaceful, like the quiet that comes after forgiveness. Clara began to look forward to Ms. Lonnie's visits, the gentle conversations, the way she always found a way to bring calm, even on the hardest days. She realized that the woman she had once feared now felt like a part of her child's story, someone she could trust completely. Late one evening, after Lonnie left, Clara whispered to her baby, "You'll grow up knowing her kind of heart." And as the child slept soundly, Clara made herself a silent promise that she would carry forward the same kindness that had once been shown to her when she least deserved it. In that quiet hospital room, an unexpected bond was born, one built not from similarity or comfort, but from courage, compassion, and the unspoken power of grace. The morning of Clara's discharge felt heavy with mixed emotions, relief, joy, and something else she couldn't quite name. The sunlight streamed softly through the hospital window, warming the white walls that had seen her pain, fear, and healing. As she packed her small bag, the door opened gently, and the hospital director stepped inside, his face kind but serious. "Mrs. Clara," he said with a polite nod, "I wanted to check on you before you leave, and to tell you something about Miss Lonnie." At the mention of the nurse's name, Clara's heart gave a small, nervous flutter. She turned toward him, unsure what to expect. The director continued, his tone calm but filled with quiet pride. "You see, she isn't just one of our best nurses. During the pandemic years ago, when many were too afraid to come to work, she stayed here for weeks without leaving. She helped deliver hundreds of babies when our staff was falling sick. She saved lives, even when it cost her her own health. That woman you met. She's one of the reasons this hospital is still standing." Clara froze, her breath catching. The image of the gentle nurse, the one she had once feared, the one she had shouted at, replayed in her mind, but now through a different lens. The woman she had doubted was not just kind. She was a hero. The director smiled faintly, unaware of the storm building inside Clara. "She never talks about it," he added. "Says she just did what any human should do." Then he gave a small nod and left, his footsteps echoing softly down the corridor. The silence that followed felt almost deafening. Clara sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling as she held her baby close. Every heartbeat seemed to whisper the same thing: "You were wrong." She remembered the first moment she saw Ms. Lonnie, how fear clouded her mind before reason ever had a chance. She remembered the quiet smile, the soft words of comfort, the way Lonnie had cared for her child without hesitation. And now, knowing everything she had been through, Clara's shame felt unbearable. Tears filled her eyes, warm and unrelenting, sliding down her cheeks onto her baby's blanket. She whispered, almost to herself, "She gave so much." And I judged her without knowing. The baby stirred, tiny fingers curling around Clara's hand, as if sensing her mother's sorrow. For a long moment, Clara sat there, listening to the rhythmic beeping of distant machines, the faint chatter in the hallway, and the memory of Lonnie's gentle voice saying, "Every child deserves kindness." That sentence now echoed differently, not as a simple truth, but as a lesson carved into Clara's heart. When the nurse entered one last time to say goodbye, Clara could barely meet her eyes. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Thank you for everything." Lonnie smiled the same soft, forgiving smile she always had, and in that moment, Clara understood. True compassion asks for nothing in return, not even understanding. It simply gives, and in doing so, changes hearts forever. Clara stood outside the nursery door, her hands trembling slightly as she watched through the glass window. Inside, Miss Lonnie moved quietly between the rows of tiny cribs, humming a soft tune while checking on the newborns. Her presence filled the room with calm, the same calm that had once made Clara feel uneasy, but now felt like something sacred. Clara took a deep breath, her heart racing as if she were about to step into a confession booth. She knew she couldn't leave the hospital without saying the words that had been sitting heavy in her chest for days. Slowly, she pushed open the door, the faint creak echoing in the otherwise peaceful room. Ms. Lonnie looked up, her eyes warm and welcoming, though clearly surprised to see Clara there. "You're supposed to be discharged already," she said softly, a small smile tugging at her lips. Clara swallowed hard and stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. I came to talk to you," she began, the words feeling fragile, uncertain. For a moment, she hesitated, searching for courage. The soft coos of the babies filled the silence between them. Finally, she spoke, her voice shaking but sincere. "I wanted to say I'm sorry for how I looked at you that day, for how I reacted. I was wrong." The confession seemed to lift a weight off her shoulders, but it also made her eyes fill with tears. Lonnie didn't speak immediately. She just looked at Clara, not with anger, not even with pity, but with something far deeper, understanding. Then, slowly, she placed a gentle hand on Clara's shoulder and said in her calm, steady tone, "Fear makes us see shadows where there is light." The words sank into the air, soft but powerful. Clara's lips trembled as she listened. Lonnie continued, her gaze kind but firm. "That day, you didn't see me. You saw your fear, the fear of losing what you love most. But I didn't see anger in you. I saw a mother's love trying to protect her child." Those words broke something open inside Clara, not in pain, but in realization. Her tears flowed freely now, silent and sincere. She shook her head, whispering, "You still choose to see kindness when I gave you none." Lonnie smiled gently, her eyes glistening with quiet emotion. "That's what healing does," she said. "It starts where forgiveness lives." They stood there for a while, not speaking. Both women surrounded by the soft breathing of newborns, a reminder of beginnings, of innocence, of second chances. Clara reached out and held Lonnie's hand, the gesture simple, but filled with meaning. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. Lonnie squeezed her hand gently. "Take care of that little one," she said with a warm smile. "Teach them to see light first, not shadows." As Clara left the nursery, sunlight streamed through the window, washing over both women. It felt like the world itself was forgiving her, and in that moment, she knew she would carry Lonnie's words in her heart for the rest of her life. Months passed, and the seasons quietly shifted from the warmth of spring to the soft chill of autumn. Life had settled into a calm rhythm for Clara. Sleepless nights had turned into giggles and lullabies, and every time she looked at her baby, she was reminded of how far she had come. Yet, there was something inside her that still called back to that hospital room, to the woman whose kindness had changed her heart. One morning, while reading a community bulletin, Clara noticed a small notice printed near the bottom: volunteers needed for the baby care program led by Nurse Lonnie. Her breath caught for a moment. Without thinking twice, she folded the paper neatly and decided she would go. The next week, she walked into the same hospital where her fear had once spoken louder than reason. The corridors looked brighter now, filled with the laughter of new mothers and the gentle cries of newborns. When she reached the nursery, she saw Ms. Lonnie, just as she remembered, calm, graceful, and surrounded by mothers seeking her guidance. For a brief moment, Clara hesitated at the door, unsure if she would even be recognized. But when Lonnie turned and saw her, her face broke into a warm smile, the kind that erased all awkwardness. "Clara," she said softly, her voice carrying both surprise and affection. "You came?" Clara nodded, smiling back. "I wanted to help like you helped me." From that day onward, the two women began working side by side. Clara assisted new mothers as they learned to hold, feed, and comfort their babies, while Lonnie guided them with her patient wisdom. Together, they created an atmosphere of warmth and trust, one where no mother felt alone or judged. Slowly, word spread about the unusual bond between the volunteer and the nurse, a bond that had started in misunderstanding, but had grown into something beautiful. Among the hospital staff, their story became something of a quiet legend. Whenever a new nurse faced a difficult patient, or when tempers rose during stressful days, someone would gently remind them, "Remember Clara and Lonnie, compassion heals faster than anger." Lonnie often said those words herself during her training sessions. True strength isn't in how loud we defend ourselves, but in how softly we forgive. For Clara, every day spent in that nursery was a small act of redemption, not because she needed to erase the past, but because she had learned from it. Sometimes, when the babies slept, she would look across the room at Lonnie, who still hummed those gentle songs, and feel grateful for the second chance life had given her. Months later, a framed photo of the two women, holding a newborn between them, was placed on the nursery wall with a small caption beneath it: "A lesson remembered: kindness can turn fear into love." And for everyone who saw it, that story served as a reminder that even one moment of compassion could change a heart, a life, and maybe even the world.